So sometimes you'll wake up, you'll go there, sit there, wait for the animal, never turns up. Or it turns up out of frame or just above you or wherever, and you can't actually see where it is. So that happens a lot. But there are other days where you get good days where like the wildlife comes like even closer than you thought and you can interact with it a bit better. It happens on every scale. In wildlife photography, it's very much like the reward is spending time with that animal, interacting with that animal, getting the photos with it and just learning more about it. So it calms you down, like chills you out and really connecting to nature. And that's what I absolutely loved about it. That real connection of being there, you know?
Welcome to episode 372 of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we are chatting with documentary wildlife Amazonian photographer Mark Fox about how this UK native ended up in the Amazon using his camera to make change for the better. So many people say, I would love to be a National Geographic photographer. And I think that's all of us. That was certainly me many years ago. Being paid to travel, bear witness to these just incredible stories, and then use your camera to share them with the rest of the world is so cool. But there's only so many Nat Geo photographers, right? Well, Mark, what he did was he took charge. He put himself in a place where he could create his own unique stories to tell. Didn't just wait for National Geographic to come calling him. Huge inspiration for those who want that National Geographic lifestyle. I really think that you're going to love this episode today. So with that, let's just go ahead and get on into it. This interview with Mark Fox. Mark, my first question for you is, when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. It's bringing me pretty far back. I've always had like a camera in my hand pretty much from the age of 11 years old. And that story goes back into, I used to be a skater boy, and then I went into a shop once, a skate shop, and then asked them for me to sponsor me, asked them to sponsor me, and then they were like, yeah, sure, we can sponsor it, but actually we need to see if you're good. So can you just go out and record, maybe get some pictures, all that kind of stuff? I was like, yeah, cool, let's go. So that's when I picked up a camera and just started recording all these skate tricks that we used to do. So really from back then, it was kind of like, I was just filming friends and doing all that kind of stuff. We made a little video. But then from there, when I was 14 years old, there was a course of photography for the first time that was released when I was there. So I then went into photography from 14 years old and then did consecutive years of studying up to university, and then I graduated from there. And so, 14 years old is when I actually studied it properly. And then when I graduated, I was like 22 years old or something. And that was when I was like, oh, I guess I'm a photographer now. And just went
like
from there.
Yeah.
It was kind of a weird thing. It's like, oh, I guess I'm a photographer. Maybe I'll try and earn some money with this. And then that was the next step,
I see. So I'm always interested in that transition going from photography as a hobby to more of a profession, because typically when photography is a hobby, when you're first starting out, you're typically just taking snapshots, right? So at what point did you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I really need more control of this camera and, I don't know, maybe invest in a proper camera?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I was doing it all for fun. And then from that period in between, I'm not sure because in the States you have different terminology, but in the UK we have like the high school, and then we have a period in between where you're 16, 17 years old, and then you go into higher education, what we would call it. So you study your A levels.
Okay.
So you graduate from your high school, and then you go into A levels period for 2 years. And then after that, you go into university. So in that period of going from the higher education into university, I actually took a year off, whereas all of my whole year was kind of forced to go to, or maybe obviously not forced, but they were recommended highly to go into university. But I didn't really like people telling me what to do. So it was kind of like, actually, no, I'm not going to go to university. I don't really know what I was going to do. So back then it was actually, I was going to go into sports science or some biology degree or something like that. But when I took a year off, that was when I really found my love for photography, and specifically in nature and landscapes and that kind of thing. So then I went from there into studying it. So it was kind of, when it became university grade studying, it was more serious. And then that's when I kind of realized, so in my second year of university is when I shot my first wedding. So that was my first paid gig. really, from what I remember. So that transition for me was very much just like I'm just gonna, I enjoy photography. I'm just gonna try and get myself out there and just do something. And that first wedding I did, the first few weddings I did was free of charge
Hmm.
because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just assisting another wedding photographer who gave me the chance to, to learn. And yeah, it just went from there, that transition period of working for free. And then once I was confident enough to try and start charging, and that's always the problem, even up until photographers now,
Yes.
I'm probably 10 years into my career and now it's still like, what's the time, how the times are changing, how much should I charge, and what country am I in now? Because I'm now in Ecuador, which is very different to earning a living in the UK or the States or wherever
Of course.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes time to like holding that camera in your hand, you had some experience taking photos. You obviously got some photos that you liked because you continued with it. When you went into university to start learning more about photography, did you find that you found photography as fulfilling still, or did it feel from an academic side that it kind of took away some of the joy? Because I didn't go to school for photography, so I'm always interested in that aspect.
Right. I loved it. I absolutely loved it because like I wasn't only just going out and taking photos, I was going out with some friends and just like taking a couple of photos of a pretty sunset anymore. It was kind of like project based. So
Mm.
because what I studied at university was wildlife photography, wildlife and landscape nature photography, it was such a unique niche in the photography field that I became friends with people that were very similar to me. They loved animals, they loved being in wildlife, like in nature, and they loved wildlife and everything else. We used to sit back and watch the David Attenborough documentaries.
Of course.
That was like our downtime. So it was really cool getting to know different people, learning different facts about different animals, what they learned, and then also learning because then I suddenly have all these peers with me. They're also learning with me at the same time. So we just bounced off each other, picked up different photography techniques, different gear, like everything else. Because before that, when I first started, it was kind of like myself and
Hmm.
only myself. It's just kind of like, oh, I'll just like, I'm going to go out and take this photo. But
Uh,
when I went to university, it was like, let's go as a group and we're going to go visit this coastal point over there and just see what's there, what wildlife there is, and try and find this bird that's been reported or whatever it is. And so I absolutely loved like that being amongst the peers.
yeah, the social aspect of it. That's so interesting. I guess if I think about it, I had a similar experience when I was in film school because, when you're making videos in high school, it's just you, and maybe your friends kind of help you out or whatever. But when you're actually in school for it, people are like, yes, let's do this. And it's great to be able to bounce ideas off of each other. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
When it comes to the technical side of photography, though, did you ever have any like major struggles that you felt were really a roadblock in your progression?
I think it's a really good question because I think for me, those struggles still exist.
Hmm.
Even as a professional, those things still exist.
Hmm.
You always have this doubt, self doubt, that whether or not you're good enough. And I feel like almost every photographer gets this, is that when you're starting off, you're learning, you then begin to start to make some money. Maybe you're not making as much as you want and you're not getting all the jobs that you wanted or not going down the same route as where you really wanted to go. So then I started doubting myself once I reached that period of being like, am I actually that good? Am I good enough to be a photographer? I've done the studying and I've done everything else. Like I think I'm okay, but actually, am I good for people to actually pay for my services? And then that thing just keeps going on and on throughout my career. It's kind of like, am I good? Because I judge myself a lot through my work. I'm almost like a perfectionist in everything I do, or mainly my photography work, where I look at it and I see all the failures in the work, like
Hmm.
where it's gone wrong, if I haven't quite composed it correctly, or missed that action shot by just a second, or missed the moment just by a little bit, or how I could have, yeah, got the angle a little bit different to be a bit more impactful, whatever it might be. I think that's a moment where I doubt myself a lot. I'm like, maybe I'm not that good. Or you're judging yourself. That's why social media is so good in finding inspiration, but actually quite bad because you're judging yourself against other people in the game,
Yeah.
which is never going to be great for your mental health and yeah, your self-esteem.
Well, but there's always the beneficial side of right of being able to look at your own photography and see where your failures are so that you can kind of overcome those in the future. Did you pick that up inherently through school, or was that just something that you've always done?
I think always for me, it was kind of like I was always comparing my work that I was producing and looking to the professionals that I liked.
Hmm.
So in my case, it was wildlife photography. So like the typical wildlife photograph, be long lens shot, bokeh, out of focus background with like crystal sharp image of the subject. And that was very much it. But when I was studying, I can't remember what lens I had. I probably had like a 300, what was it? Like a 70 to 300 macro lens or something. It was like a really cheap Sigma lens that I had. That was my long range lens. Very cheap, but it didn't achieve quite the same grade as obviously what these professional lenses were, the 300mm prime, 500, 800, whatever it might be. So there was always that change in quality. So once I went to university, I was able to use this top grade equipment. And then I started achieving. It's like, oh, wow, actually, okay, I can get this short depth of field, bokeh, like get this crystal sharp image of the subject. So it was kind of like, once I had reached that point where I realized I could take the photo very similar or very much the same to a professional, I was like, oh, maybe I am at that level of photography now. But it was very much like, for me, a self-judgment of, am I really there? But other people might also learn that like they might need that criticism coming from other people to help them or to push them along and guide them like that. But for me, I think it's always been there with me, where I've always judged my work myself. And then even if someone else says it's good, I know whether it's good or not. And that's been something I've actually battled throughout my whole career, really, is where I've taken a photograph. And because I know how I can make it better, I never find the good photos. So even probably, I don't know, about 8 years later in my career, I never really felt like I was that good to where I was thinking mentally in my mind. And until I started getting shots where I was like, yeah, cool. Even now, actually, I know the next level where I should be at my photography. Although other people might enjoy it, I know there's another level that I can go a bit higher and capture more emotion in the photo or different ways and getting it. Yeah, and that comes as personal development in photography, I guess.
Of course, of course. Do you think that criticism in your head comes from just being in that situation and knowing what it was like when you were shooting? Or can you look at somebody else's photos and feel the same way? Like, man, if they were just one step to the left, or if they just waited half a second, it would have been better.
100%. Yes to both of those things.
Really?
I definitely, because I've been there, I know how I could have done the photo well. And also I know, because obviously when you're taking the photo, you don't see what's behind the photographer, if they have like limited space or if they have loads of distractions of people there and you're trying to manage that situation as well. So you don't really see that. But if you're obviously taking a photo, you're like, obviously it's not the best as what it could be, but in the scenario that I was in, it's actually it was a good shot or whatever it might be. But I also look at even because I have a background in video work as well. So even when I look at documentaries and things like that, and I see people getting different shots, and I always think, you can make that shot better. Always. You know, you could just get this kind of shot, or you miss this wider shot, or whatever it might be. I always just have that kind of click in my mind where I'm like, you can get that. And I think that actually comes from wedding photography. So a bit later in my career, or actually at the beginning of my career, but when I graduated from university, I went into wedding photography, and that's where I learned really assessing the situation. So at university, it was very much wildlife photography, learning a lot about the subject, learning their calls, what time of day they come out, when they come to feed, where they particularly like to feed. If it's a fishing bird, for example, they might like to go on one particular branch. So as long as you know where that branch is, you can go there at a certain period of day, and it will be there fishing. Or if it's squirrels, whatever it might be, any of the subjects, there's information you can learn about that subject to get better photos. But when it came to wedding photography, it was very much like okay, I'm working reactively to whatever's going on. So if there's a bird flying through the frame, I'm going to get those shots. But then I just changed that attitude towards people, where if they're kissing or there's that moment, boom, get that shot, I'm ready to go. You know, so I was always ready, very quick reacting to everything that's happening. But what I picked up through wedding photography is the movement. With wildlife, you can't move. You have to be quiet. You have to be stationed, depending on the wildlife, of course, but you have to be stationed and quiet. So I would go in before, like when it's dark, before sunrise, sit in my hide, wait for the animal to come out, and then take the shot.
Jeez.
And then, whereas in weddings, they obviously know you're there, but my type of photography, my style is a fly on the wall approach. So it's very much like photojournalism, where I kind of react to whatever's going on, but I'm not interacting with them so much. I do a little bit, of course, but yeah, so it was kind of like where I learned I could move around the subject get more 3D and get the wide shot and then move to the side and get like the other shot of the groom and then the bride, and their reactions and everything. So I was then creating like a story, which then created the bigger picture rather than wildlife just picking up one photo that just shows the animal and its beauty.
Right. Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Yeah.
No, that sounds very cool. But I always, whenever I see like a great wildlife photo, I think, man, that is awesome. And then immediately I think of all those cold hours that you have to just sit in the morning and just wait and hope that something comes up. And then if something does come up, I'm assuming here you get like 3 shots and then it flies away and you're like, whew, what a day. And then like you go home. Is that right? Or do you get a lot more variety than that?
No, that's pretty much a nail on the head. Days definitely change. So sometimes you'll wake up, you'll go there, sit there, wait for the animal, never turns up. Or it turns up out of frame or just above you or wherever, and you can't actually see where it is. You can hear it and you know it's there. So that happens a lot. But there are other days where you get good days where like the wildlife comes like even closer than you thought, or is actually okay with you, and you can interact with it a bit better. So yeah, it happens on every scale, whether it's good or bad. But that's like in wildlife photography, it's very much like the reward is spending time with that animal, interacting with that animal, getting the photos with it, and just learning more about it. And also at the same time, because you are within nature, all you're doing is listening to the calls of the animal or what's around you, the surroundings. So it's very much like you're meditating in that respect. So it calms you down, like chills you out, and you're really connecting to nature. And that's what I absolutely loved about it. It's that real connection of being there, you know?
Could you imagine if wedding photography was like that, where you just had like show up at a church, like, well, I know that weddings happen at churches. I better just show up at this church and hope that there's a wedding today. And if there is, then
sit there in the corner.
Yeah.
Sit there in the corner, just not saying anything. Who's that guy?
Who's that guy? He's got a camera. He's supposed to be here. That's funny.
I actually had done that once where I had gone into a wedding. I was second shooting it, and the wedding was in the church, but that church had multiple weddings.
Okay, yeah.
Throughout the day. And I had arrived early because I was young, eager, keen to get there and like check out the space and see what I could do, impress my, the first shooter. And yeah, I went in and I walked into a different wedding. I walked in.
Did you think that it was your wedding? Were you like, oh no, I'm late?
Because I'd never met the couple. I was just told, go to this location. I'm going to be with the bride, but go to this location, get some shots of the church, but sat down, whatever, interactive shots. So I was like, okay, I'll just go in. And then a couple of signing the books to get the full agreement.
And you're like, oh no.
Through legal. And I just kind of realized there's the photographer. I'm not here. And there's another photographer there, like someone else. And, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to go out a little bit and just sit outside and see what's going on here. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so funny. Yeah, I don't know what I would do in that situation. Because it's like at some point, like you want to be there and you want to shoot, but also if you like, you don't see the other photographer, like you kind of assume that role. And I wonder if I would like go up the aisle and like try to get their shots for a wedding that wasn't mine. That'd be so
Exactly.
Funny.
Luckily, it wasn't actually the ceremony, which is good. They were like behind, everyone was kind of mingling at that point, like sat down at church, whilst the couple went to the side and signed the legal papers. So luckily it was that, and it wasn't actually the event where I was like moving around trying to get the shots.
Oh, that's
because that would have been so much more awkward.
Of course, yeah, I can't imagine. And then to realize like, oh, this is my couple. Have a good day. Goodbye. Yeah, and just walk out.
Exactly.
That's funny. Well, today when we are talking right now, you are not in the UK. Where in the world are you right now?
Yeah, so I'm actually in South America, in Ecuador, on the equator. Yeah, so right now I'm actually on the coast, but I'm based in the Andean mountains. But most of my work is done in the Amazon rainforest, which is about 5 hours travel.
Okay, so many questions. Let's just start with, how did you get there?
How did I get there? Very good question. I was led here somehow by some force. I don't know. I had a job after doing my wedding photography and stuff. I then put that to the side as a side job, then went full-time into video. I worked for ITV. I was a cameraman. I learned how to do lighting, sound, production, live shows, all that kind of stuff. And then once I'd reached that point where I wasn't quite learning enough, I was directing the live shows and all that kind of thing, I thought, right, I need to change. So I just upped and quit the job and just went traveling because I'd always wanted to travel, never quite had the right chance to go. But because I was in a job, I earned a bit of money. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to go travel for a bit. So I quit my job and left. And a large part of that travel was Latin America. And then halfway on the trip, I decided. So I went from Argentina up the countries into Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Mexico, and then worldwide after that. But halfway through that Latin American trip, Ecuador was my middle spot. So it was like 5 months in on the trip or something. And it was kind of, yeah, just gonna chill here for a bit. I'm gonna do a bit of work here. I'm gonna, just surf on the coast, do whatever. And then from there, I realized I just felt more of a connection with that country. And yeah, and then I came back, I think 2 years later it was. That was 1 year later. So 2018, and then 2019, I then moved here to live. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I'm kind of doing full circle now, where my base was at university. I was doing nature wildlife photography, went into wedding photography, went into like news documentary style video production. And then after that, I then went traveling, did a bit of travel photography, learned all that, and loved it all. And then when I went into Ecuador, I thought, I need to go back to my roots because I really love nature photography. But the problem was there was no money in it. But now maybe I could try it. Now I'm in the industry a bit longer. I could try and make my way into making some money with this. So then that was the next step, going into the Amazon and trying to learn Spanish for one, and then also trying to get people to know who I am, because I knew I was good technically, but no one knew who I was. So I thought, and then that was the problem there. From 2019 till now, that was like the growth of like getting people to know who I am, learning Spanish, going to the jungle, documenting what's happening.
Wow. So documenting what's happening there, meaning like social issues or specifically wildlife. And I know that we talked about this before we officially started recording, but you said that you also shot some Ecuadorian weddings. I got to hear about that.
Yes. Yeah. So when I first arrived here, because no one knew any of my work in the Amazon, I didn't know anyone that did work in the Amazon. So it was hard to just go straight in there. You can't just walk into the Amazon and suddenly become a professional photographer and live from it. So I was trying to get those steps. And in that process, I thought, okay, I'll go back to weddings. I've been doing it on the side for a while. And yeah, that would have been 9 years where I've been doing weddings. So it was kind of like the process where I thought, let's just do it. Let's just try it out. But of course, when I went into doing my first wedding photography gig, I was second shooting again. So I was back to second shooting. Didn't really know Spanish very well, but I knew enough to understand what was going on. But the ceremony was just very different. The ceremony was just kind of, I couldn't remember any of like speeches that was going on and the wording that was used. But like so I lived on the coast, which was typically very hot in the day. So people here have weddings later in the evening. So it's more maybe like a 4 p.m. wedding rather than in the UK, you would have one as early as 11 a.m.
Sure.
But normally, typically at like 1 p.m. Lunchtime, and then latest 3, 4. But here it was like earliest is 3, 4 o'clock. And actually, I've had weddings at like 7 p.m. or whatever, because it's just cooler. Wow, it's not so hot, no one's sweating. And then people just party throughout the whole night, until 5, 6 a.m. So that was like super interesting to see that difference culturally and, and also geographically to do with the weather and the heat.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. So you had shot some weddings. What an experience. So now you wanted to get back into focusing on working in the Amazon. So again, was your focus to photograph wildlife, or was it more all of everything else that was going on in the Amazon? Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So with the wildlife, I've always loved doing it, but I quickly gave up on it after university. And maybe I did it for a couple more years. Maybe after that, it was very much like I never made money from it, but I liked doing it. And that was because I didn't have the gear to buy the long lenses. I don't even know how much long lenses are these days, but back then you would buy a lens for like $5,000 in pounds, cheapest, So I never had that kind of money. And when I came here, I never bothered to buy that kit because I never used it in my work in photography jobs. So it was just pointless to invest in something like that if you're not going to make money from it. So I never actually went into wildlife in the Amazon. So then I started adjusting into people and indigenous communities and stuff, because I had done that with weddings where it was kind of photographing people. I worked in the TV industry where I was interviewing people, all of these different things that
Sure.
I was doing. I kind of earned a love for actually hearing someone's story more than there's a nice animal there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I actually went to the jungle and I was going with foundations, NGOs, those kind of people where I would just document the work that they're doing. So that could be environmental work, conservation work, human rights work, whatever it might be. I just went in and just kind of documented the work that they were doing. And on top of that, getting to know people in the community and then documenting the way they live, the way they farm, the way they hunt, the way what they drink, their diet, all of those kind of things. I was just going in from an outsider looking in, just seeing what there was and just learning. Yeah.
How did you figure out, I guess, how to make a living? Were you earning money while working with these NGOs, or you said, yeah, you're shaking your head?
Yes. So when I was earning my money through wedding photography, and then my first jobs in the Amazon was for free because no one knew. The problem here is that the NGOs, foundations, and everyone else, they don't really have much budget.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not really going to want to hire a photographer. And obviously going into the Amazon is such like a high sought after job that like people will just go in there for free and just do it.
Oh, wow.
So that makes my job very difficult as like a working photographer specializing in that because they'll just get someone coming in that's traveling through the country and then wants to go and like help out, do a good deed, and then just do some free photography work for experience. So that's how I started off, basically. So it's kind of like a horrible circle where it's frustrating that happens, but it's kind of, for me, it was the way to get in because
Yeah.
I needed to create a portfolio. And that was the most important thing for me is that I knew that I was good enough and I knew the quality of my work was good, but I didn't have any work inside of the Amazon rainforest to then send off to other people, other organizations to be like, hey, hire me. So yeah, I ended up working for free, going for trips, which was amazing. Like they paid, my only condition was that you pay for my travel from where I am, get me into the Amazon, and then I'll do the shots for free,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll edit them and send them to you. And then anything you publish, you have to put my name on it and whatever, tell me where it's going, etc. And that was my conditions that I had. So then after doing a few jobs like that, I ended up having a portfolio that was Amazon only, rather than all the other travel things that I'd done,
Sure.
or whatever it might be. It was just Amazon, which then made it more specific that I could then send off to NGOs and foundation organizations, all of those people where I could just be like, hey, this is my work, check it out, and will you hire me?
Yeah, that makes it a whole lot easier when you have a portfolio full of the images that you want to show people. And that's one of the things that I talk about often with new photographers is typically that first website, and I'll be honest, mine was as well. It's got like the still life, personal life, weddings is kind of like at the bottom, but then there's also like just like those everyday things, landscapes. And when you have this portfolio of a bunch of stuff, it can be hard to get the recognition for what it is that you want to do, right? Because you're kind of just known as kind of the person who does everything. Is that the reason why you decided, like, I'm going to just stick with a portfolio of images from the Amazon? You're shaking your head. Okay, so then within that, within the portfolio, I want to know how you went about building it, because in my head, I think Amazon, there's got to be so much involved with that. Not only the river, but also the forests themselves, the life within it, the indigenous people within there. Was there one thing that you focused on, or it was, if it's Amazon related, it's in the portfolio?
Yeah, so for me, it was very much, I wanted to be a conservation photographer, but I heard somewhere, I don't know where it was, if it was YouTube or someone told it to me or it was a podcast, whatever it might have been, I heard somewhere that it was, you're too broad, you need to be specific on what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Can't just be a conservation photographer anymore. You have to be very specific. So I thought, okay, what do I really want to do? And then that's when I thought the Amazon. I was like, okay, I'm going to go in the Amazon. And not just the Amazon, because that's covered in like 6 countries.
Sure.
I'm going to go in the Ecuadorian Amazon. When, as a traveler, and I'd done the travel backpacking before, no one was going into Ecuador, and no one really, so they didn't have a high tourism budget. Everyone was skipping it unless they were going to the Galapagos. So they kind of put all their budget into the Galapagos and sold that as the beauty location.
Ah.
So I was really interested in going into the Ecuadorian Amazon rather than the Peruvian Amazon or the Brazilian Amazon. So that for me was super important to find your niche and find your identity. So when you were mentioning about on your website, you have your personal work and you had everything else. You kind of want to see where you want to be, the work that you want to do, the jobs you want to do, and just only put up that stuff. Social media, you can do all the other jobs in the background, your headshots or whatever, portraits, whatever it is. But if you actually want to, for example, in my case, if you want to do work in the Amazon, you have to show people that that's kind of what you do.
Sure.
So it means that you have experience in that, and then not when they go on your website, you're looking at everything. You're like, well, what does this guy do? He does still life here. He does fashion photography there. He's like, his identity is very clear. He does photojournalism in the Amazon, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, for me, that was very important, just to have that specific thing. So once I create that portfolio, it was clear that I was doing that. So I changed all of my Instagram feed, just did Amazon work. So it became all very green. And then within the Amazon, like you say, there's loads of different subjects. I kind of like, because I noted it towards the Ecuadorian Amazon. I was just telling the stories of what was happening there. So it was kind of just meeting people and photographing the people there, the different nationalities that live within the Amazon, because they all have their own culture in itself, their own language and everything else. So I was photographing the people, any wildlife that might come across, luckily, because I only had a 200 mil lens. Yeah. So it was only if it was kind of there and ready to photograph rather than, going long distance with it. And then, I got a drone photographer. Got a drone, so I got into drone photography, practiced how to use that. So then I started doing drone photography in the Amazon, and just basically every other technique you can do, just landscapes, people, wildlife.
Gotcha. Okay. So when we're building a portfolio, I like to stress the importance of like looking for holes in what it is that you're showing, right? In wedding photography, if you got a bunch of ring shots, that's great. But if you don't have any happy smiling couples, that could be an issue. So can you talk to me a bit about knowing what shots it was that you wanted to get, and then also planning on how to get these shots? Because I know sometimes, or the majority of the times, if there's a photo that you want, it's not necessarily like, well, we'll see if it happens in front of me and then I'll just shoot that, but you actually have to go after it. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely in my style as well, journalism, where I'm kind of like fly on the wall, maybe influencing situations, but not creating them. So it's kind of like, maybe I'll put the person that's there doing something like, oh, do you mind just moving what you're doing just over here where the light's a bit better and you get a nice window light or whatever it might be, where the background might be better in the trees or the shade of green in the trees. So I was kind of adjusting in that situation. Sorry, what was your question again? I kind of got sidetracked.
No worries. How do you go about planning the shots that you're going to get? Like what aspects go into that? Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to planning, I'm always looking at the background of the person, what they're doing, but also more trips I got into the Amazon, I was learning to understand Indigenous culture and what they do and what you shouldn't really do. Like, you can't really go into the Amazon. So typically, when you go into the Amazon, visit a community, they welcome you. So you sit down, and it's generally like a house, like a straw roof, and you're sat down with no walls. It's open to allow the wind to flow, and you kind of sat down, and then the leader, the chief of the community, will then mention who he is, say how thankful he is for you to come in and everything else. And then maybe the vice president might come and say some words. And then like the leader of our group that we're with, because I'm typically with an NGO, so they'll come in and say, thank you very much for receiving us, and my name is so-and-so, blah, blah. You give a brief introduction, and that goes around every part of the team. The new visitors that come in, you explain. So for me, I would obviously say I'm a photographer, I'm here to document. If you don't want a photo, just let me know. If not, I'm going to be around, just taking photos here and there. But if you really don't want a photo, just put your hand up and say no. So it was kind of just that kind of style of just planning. And then once I realized there was more things that was happening here, like, because sometimes you just don't really realize that, like, maybe a lady walk off and then walk into the jungle somewhere and then come back with, like, there's a plantain, a big branch of plantain on their head, and walk through, or like a canister full of yucca where they start preparing the lunch. And I had always wondered, like, where did they get that stuff from? It's kind of cool. So then, like, I would always keep an eye out. The next trip I'll go on, keep an eye out on, okay, I see this lady's walking down there. Maybe I'll try and follow her and see where she's up to. Or better yet, I'll try and plan that shot where I'll get permission off the president of the community, and then say, I'm looking to get this kind of shot. Do you mind, like, do you know anyone that would be great to have, preferably like a grandmother, whatever it is, and then just describe the shot that I have in my mind. And that's kind of how it worked. And I have, like, even now I have so many lists of shots that I want, but it would take me either days into the trip or even years until now where I haven't got the shots yet. But I know they're there and they're ready to go. So when that opportunity comes, I'll make that shot happen.
Wow.
So one typical shot I could think at the top of my mind is I have a shot of a girl who, with their brothers and sisters, they were paddling down the river. The river had overflowed over into the community, where it then became kind of like mangrove or like swamp area. So they were just kind of practicing their canoe skills in that swampy area and going through. And I seen them, so I knocked off a couple of shots of them kind of coming through. And I got them to come towards me, and I was like getting some shots with that, like jungle background, etc. And then after that, they kind of jumped into the water and just kind of sat in the water, just kind of up to their shoulder level kind of thing, sat down. So I then went down on their level, took something that I'd learned in wildlife photography, which was always be at eye level to your subject in wildlife. So if you're photographing like a squirrel, for example, on the floor, you want to be lying down on the floor and shooting that, because then it will create a longer depth of field and a shallower depth of field, should I say, because of the background behind you is at a longer distance. Then I applied that in with the water and just got her to put her chin onto the water, so it created a bit of reflection. And then I got the shot, like a portrait shot of just her face, and then a little bit of reflection of the water, the crystal, no noise in the back, nothing there, full of bokeh. And I had planned that shot for probably not years, but maybe about a year, where I'd always wanted to do that shot, but the time never arrived, or the subject wasn't quite the way I wanted them to be. So it was kind of, I'm always constantly planning different shots that I want to make, or different videos, or different content.
So with a photo like that, right, if I were to take that photo of my kid or my neighbors or other people that I know, I would be excited to print that photo up, bring it to them, and be like, look at this great shot that I got of you. I hope that you enjoy. Is that still the case for more indigenous tribes, or what is that relationship between you and the finished product with them?
Yeah, so it's interesting, actually, because the way indigenous communities are these days, though the media might portray them differently, I think for me, without getting too controversial with this, is that I think indigenous people are portrayed as savage or wild, that kind of genre.
Yeah.
Where actually it's very much changing now, where they are integrated with society, where there's cities full of indigenous people. So you kind of, in Ecuador itself, it's split up into three. You have the coast, then it hits the Andes Mountains, so it's all mountainous, and on the other side of the mountains then becomes Amazon jungle. Wow. So on that peak between the Andes and the Amazons, you have like the row of cities, which are called like probably the gateway cities to get into the Amazon. So if I'm going to the Amazon, where it's flying, getting a canoe, or driving, I'm going to arrive at that city first and then enter in from there. So in those cities, you have a lot of indigenous peoples living there, of all different nationalities. So that's almost like a story in itself, where it's like a city in the Amazon, rather than this like wild, savage person that doesn't have any clothes on running through the forest. And that's very much like an image that they might portray on certain documentaries or magazines. So some of these communities have Wi-Fi. Some of these communities have Instagram accounts. Some of the, is very much integrated with technology.
I see.
There obviously, of course, there are communities that are further in that I've been to where they don't have Wi-Fi, but they might still have a phone. So when they go into those gateway cities to get whatever it might be, some of them go in to study at those cities. Some of them might go in to see some family that moved there, whatever it might be. They still connect to their Instagram account or their WhatsApp or whatever it is. So I always try and send the photos to them, whether it's tagging them in my Instagram account, pairing it up with them, collaborating with them. So then at least gets traffic going into their account. So then people are following them and not me. You know what I mean? So my following are then looking at them. Like, they're kind of interesting. I'm going to follow them. So I kind of try and do that as much as I can, so then they're getting more exposure, because it really helps them to put their voice out. So I'm kind of like a voice to help, like a platform to help them grow. So a lot of them have their own issues and their own problems that happen locally in their community. So I kind of just create some content where they can use it for their own social media or wherever it might be, as well as sending it to the NGOs, where they'll use it to try and get funding for their project or raise awareness for the project, whatever it might be. So it's kind of, I do a bit of everything, but more importantly, I think always always worth, if you can, get it back to the person through an Instagram account or whatever it might be.
Of course.
If that fails, which actually just reminded me that I would love to do is like print out some shots. And I've only done that on a few occasions where they haven't had Instagram or whatever, where I've gone out and like printed some of the shots and sent it off to them, or when I've gone back and revisited them, given it to them or showed them pictures on my phone or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's always a nice feeling to help them. I don't know, just kind of let them see your work and, oh, that's so and so from the other community. Or because I've been in the Amazon for about 4 years now, so the kids that I'm photographing probably now teenagers. So it's kind of like going back, oh, that's Daniela when she was only 9 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and now she's completely changed because that's that transitional period of becoming a teenager. So that's also kind of interesting, is following individuals as they grow as a person and in looks as well.
Yeah. I apologize if I insinuated that it was just a bunch of savages. I guess the root of my question was more along the lines of, because they're so remote, I don't know if it's easy to get photos to them. So I appreciate you explaining that and helping me better understand, because I would assume, I mean, it's hard enough for me to get Wi-Fi sometimes when I'm on the road. So to know that there's internet access out in the remote Andes Mountains in the Amazon is very cool to know. I like that. And I would imagine seeing photos, I mean, I always love seeing photos, unique photos, and I would imagine when children see photos of themselves, it's very cool to see. But I know that you also work with several organizations. You mentioned some NGOs, and one of them that you mentioned in an email to me was with a company who I believe makes solar canoes. Is that right? Tell me about your work with them.
Yeah, so they're amazing. Definitely check them out. They're called Cara Solar. Cara is with a K, so Kara, Solar. Those guys, they're based in the mountains, but they do all the work in the Amazon. They also have space in the Amazon as well, where they practice their canoes and everything. But so to go from community to community, people used to have canoes that were hollowed out from a tree trunk, and that was how it's kind of done. Now, some of them might make their canoes by using chainsaws, physically, kind of pasting planks of wood together to create that canoe base. But traditionally, it was literally finding the biggest tree you got, chop it down and hollow it out, and then that's just your base.
Wow.
And then on that, they used to use a stick and just go down the river, which they still do, but now it's very common to see a motorized canoe where they fill out with gasoline and then they have the motor on the end of the wooden canoe and they're just going down the river or upriver, which is obviously has so many benefits. It's so much quicker to do. It's less strenuous to go upriver. I don't know how they do it with all those people on the boat and with all their stuff that transport going up a river using just sticks. I don't know how they do that at all. It's crazy. And they still do that because sometimes they can't afford the gasoline or they don't have enough gasoline because obviously they need to go into the city to get it or whatever. So obviously it being a gasoline powered engine, it's putting pollution into the rivers. Not good for any of the wildlife that's actually living inside of the river there. So what Cara Solar wanted to do and do right now is that they replaced that system with a motorized solar powered engine. So that could be either batteries that have been solar charged in a base that are inside their community where they have solar panels, connect them up to batteries, charge up the batteries, put them in the canoe, so then they can, have battery powered canoes rather than gasoline fueled. But also they have big solar panels on top of the canoes. There's another archetype where that charges the batteries that stay inside of the canoe and power it that way. So the disadvantage to that is actually it's a lot slower for communities. So if they're traveling at long distances, they don't typically want to be in there because it just takes longer.
Sure.
But also it doesn't go as far as what you would, because you might have another tank of gasoline that you would want to put in, which can just refill. Whereas for solar power, you have to stop and then let it recharge right in the sun. So those are the two disadvantages. But obviously the best advantage is that it's free because Cara Solar put these things in free of charge. They train up Indigenous people to then become managers of their own solar powered system. And then on any problems, they'll report back to Cara Solar. I should also mention that Cara Solar do have Indigenous trained people that live in the Amazon also. So they're part of the team. They're not just like a separate entity. And yeah, I just think it's just so amazing that they've created a system that's solar powered, going into the jungle, pollution free, for the river's sake, contamination. And then they're just putting them in deep into the Amazon as well, like
Yeah.
on the Ecuadorian border of Ecuador and Peru,
Yeah.
right down deep where there's nothing there, and they just have a solar powered engine. It's amazing.
That is very cool. And I'm sure that it is helpful to a lot of people who don't want to just use sticks to go upriver. Because again, that sounds
Yeah,
absolutely
exactly.
terrible. But as a photographer, I want to know, like, you obviously like this idea. This is beneficial in many ways and can help out a lot of people. So knowing the story of the company and knowing what it is that they're providing, what sorts of imagery do you try to create with your camera to help tell the story of the company and sell its benefits?
Yeah. So for me, particular work I've been doing with them is more drone work. So I was doing aerial photography video of the canoe in action, of it moving out of the dock, going down the river, that kind of thing, and nice, beautiful landscapes. And then also drone work from above, looking down at the solar panels, getting the heat of the sun, and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, I was also going into the communities and just documenting the culture of communities itself, from the headwear they might wear, or the clothes, the face markings, or whatever it might be that they have that's unique to them, just documenting it and getting to know them more importantly. Because I think what's important, especially in the position that I'm in, which is amazing, is that I can go back. I'm not just doing a one-off trip and then that's my chance gone. I'm going in and I'm learning, speaking to these people, opening up to them, saying where I've been, where I visited it amongst the Amazon, different communities that are around, saying, oh yeah, I met these people, blah, blah, blah. And then having a rapport with them. And that really breaks their defense of, I don't really want this photo to be like, oh, I don't want this white man who's come in taking a photo of me and I don't know where it's going to go. I kind of say, hey, look, like if you've got an Instagram account, let me pass these photos to you when we go back into Wi-Fi zone, and then once they're edited, I'll give them over and all that kind of thing. So I think that's really cool, is to have that rapport with the communities themselves.
Of course, yeah. Again, that's one of those things where it's great to know how you can, what am I trying to say here in words, when you can use your camera to help benefit many people, not only many people, but also like a larger cause, which is solar power over petroleum, especially in such a delicate ecosystem here. That just has to really feel like amazing inside. And I wonder if you could ever go back to like shooting weddings, like where there might be more money involved. Like, is that something that you could ever do? Or like, is this the path where you're like, no. Like, I see what this camera can do and how it can affect the world. This is the only path going forward.
Yeah, no, I've actually come up in the past 2 years. Well, like I said, I plan stuff ahead of time. And as well in my career, I've planned the steps that I want to do and how I can do it, how I can make money and everything else. Because like you say, working with NGOs and everything else, it's not the biggest money earner in the world, but it's the motivation of helping people out, living in community and learning from people in their spiritual sense, and then the way of thinking, everything that they have is very much so eye-opening, because it's so different to the culture that we've grown up in. So that's what I absolutely love, and that's why I love going and helping them. But I have, in answer to your question, would I want to go back to weddings? I actually would. I was thinking actually a couple of weeks ago, I thought kind of cool to shoot some weddings this year, because it's been a while, and it's kind of nice because it shapes up your photography. It's different. It's a different style of photography, and sometimes if you're doing that different style, you can then realize or learn something new that you might be able to adapt into the new area of photography that you're in. So for me, I kind of like changing it up when I can. So doing other weddings, yeah, I would like to do them, but I don't. Only if they come to me. I don't go out searching for them anymore.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it's just important to shake things up and just move around in that way.
Yeah, it's great to be able to have a focus when it comes to a professional, like the path of your career. But when you have a camera in your hand, man, sometimes you just got to create images. And if that's something different and outside of that realm, that's even better. That's even better. Mark, I know that we are at the end of our time here. People have got to be interested. I've never been to the Amazon. I love seeing images that you have shared online of the Amazon because it's just so interesting. And again, a place where I've never been.
Thank you.
And I love just being exposed to that sort of imagery. And I'm sure that listeners are going to feel the same way. So can you share with us where we can find you online and follow you along, see some of your work?
Of course. So I use mainly Instagram, to be honest. So Instagram, it's Mark Fox Photo, and that's Mark with a K rather than C. And on my website is the same as well, www.markfoxphoto.com.
All right, as always, tons of takeaways from this episode. I'm going to share 3 of them with you right now. The first one is to always plan, but be open to the organic. So many times we have an idea for a photo, and as we pursue it, we think about all these little details and how it's going to turn out. But inevitably, it's not going to turn out just as we imagine. So in a sense, we're kind of let down, right? But when you don't plan every detail and you're kind of open to the organic and you run with it rather than trying to push up against it so that something will fit your vision, well, then we end up, I have found, producing images that may not be exactly what we had in mind, but they still turn out to be something great and definitely memorable. Second takeaway is learning how to stand out. Mark can't be mad that other photographers are doing the exact same thing that he did by traveling to the Amazon and volunteering to shoot for free so that he can build a portfolio. So now what Mark has to do is focus on being better. Creating better images, sure, but also just being a better person who is also a photographer, caring for the communities that he goes into, sharing his images, doing what he can do to help, letting them know that he cares, and not just being there to build a portfolio and bounce. Takeaway number 3 is using your camera as a tool to help. Many of us pick up a camera to capture these little moments of life, but these little moments can really mean the world to somebody. My mom, she scrapbooked our whole lives growing up, and at the time, when she would show me these pages, I would think, oh, that's cool. But now that I'm an adult and I can show them to my kids, I appreciate them so much more. So know that every photo that you capture can help somebody else. Maybe not instantly, maybe so, but again, maybe not. But you have to keep going, and you have to keep shooting for that exact reason. Now, before we wrap this thing up, I just want to invite you into the Beginner Photography Podcast community. If you want to grow your skills as a photographer, the best way to do that is to surround yourself with others who are just as passionate about photography as you are, and can provide helpful answers to all of your questions and even give feedback to your photos. Now, to join the most helpful community on the internet for new photographers, just head over to beginnerphotopod.com/group. Again, beginnerphotopod.com/group, or you can just click the link on the homepage at beginnerphotographypodcast.com now. Now, that is it for this week. Thank you again so much for tuning into this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. You can learn more about CloudSpot by heading over to deliverphotos.com. And remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.